15 additional questions about the 1950 census before and after its public unveiling. So in February of 2021, I posed 20 questions about the 1950 census and the use of locational search tools. And since then, I've accumulated a number of new questions that I want to address on this video. 15 new questions. So we're going to divide it into before the rollout on April 1st of 2022 and afterwards. First question. Will Americans abroad enumerated in 1950, and they were, be part of the rollout? And these are people who were not in the U.S. or its territories. Give you some background on that. If I go to the Census Bureau website, I see this statement that Americans abroad were enumerated for the first time in 1950. Provisions were made to count members of the armed forces, crews of vessels, and employees of the U.S. government, mostly the diplomatic corps, living in foreign countries along with any members of their families also abroad. We're not talking about a small number of people here. We're talking about over 480,000 of them, more people than those 4 states individually. However, I decided in April of 2021 to research that and came to the conclusion that they would not be part of the rollout in April of 2022. I need to revise that. In September of 2021, Claire Kluskens, who is at the National Archives, is a specialist in census documents, published this blog about the enumeration of people abroad in 1950. And she indicated that census schedules exist for Canton, Johnston, Midway, and Wake Islands that include U.S. military personnel and civilian contractors and their dependents, and then shows where those records will be. These schedules will be part of the 1950 census release on April 1st, 2022. However, she says emphatically that no other records of Americans overseas are part of the 1950 census. I'm giving you the link to her article. You could always pause this video and get these links. So when Claire speaks, it's not an opinion, it's a fact. Second question, was the housing information saved? What was saved? Now, the housing schedule was actually on the back of the population schedule. It was not filmed. We see summary information about housing, but not for specific residences. However, the Census Bureau came up with pamphlets for cities of over 50,000 in number, came up with 213 pamphlets which do give information about the block that the residence was on. There are maps and tables there. If you want to see a list of those cities, I've put that page on my Dropbox account. Here's also an address to the Census Bureau where you can find the pamphlet for any of those 213 urban areas. So what is on the summary for a block? Well, as you can see here, it tells you for each block how many units were owner-occupied, renter-occupied, whether they were dilapidated or not, whether they had running water, a private bath, whether they were overcrowded. There were some definitions about overcrowding there. A little bit about the racial balance of the neighborhood, the contract monthly rent, And for those people who responded, who owned their dwelling, how much was the dwelling worth? This was in 1950. And a $1950 today would be about 10 times the buying power. So a dollar in 1950 would be about $9 or $10 buying power today. I have a YouTube video which describes the process of getting those pamphlets. Question 3. I got the housing pamphlet for your particular area, but some block maps were missing. Well, that's true. I recognized that when I went through all of the pamphlets. And so I wrote to the Census Bureau reference librarian, and they were able to give me the 26 missing maps. And we have put them online at the stevemorse.org website on the utility called 1940/1950 block maps. So all the maps are there. So if you're missing maps, we have them. Question 4. I heard there may quickly be a name index based on handwriting and optical character recognition. What do you know about that? Well, I know there's a lot of speculation about that. There is one interesting statement, and the statement is by Claire, who says that the National Archives and Records Administration is exploring options. Well, I'm exploring options to become a billionaire. I don't think that's going to happen. To provide a preliminary name index based on handwriting recognition technology, which would not be fully accurate. Now, the National Archive tends to hold their cards close to their vest. In fact, when Steve Morse and I participated on the 1940 census on the NARA website, we had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So I'm surprised that they're dangling this in front of us, but we will see. It's not going to be fully accurate. And just to show you how difficult it is to do handwriting, although it's possible. And, you know, I would guess that some of these commercial companies might try and do that. I'll show you one of my favorite examples. This is from the 1910 census in Pennsylvania. The company, that commercial company, outsourced the records, I think, to China for them to actually do the transcription. And so the Chinese transcriber got to this record of the Donatos, and guess what they put down for the name of the son? The son is less than a year old. You can see it there. And what we find is that the name of this person on the index was put as Wachnataneget. So I'm not that confident about people understanding, or even computers understanding, handwriting. Of course, any name index assumes that the name on the census schedule was written accurately and that everyone was enumerated and their name appears on the schedule. Because people do various variations of a name, they can do that infinitely. But if the person was missed, then, you know, a name index doesn't make much sense. So locational tools will always be a useful part of census searches. Question 5. Why use the stevemorse.org one-step map index tool, which we do have, rather than the National Archives catalog? And the answer to that is in a video that I've looked at thousands of these maps and produced this video on using enumeration district maps with emphasis on the 1940 and 1950 U.S. censuses and concentrating on the problems that you may face. So the one-step map utility, which is part of the unified tool, will get you to many 1950 ED maps that are either missing, hiding, misnamed, or mislinked at the National Archives catalog. Question 6. What were the requirements to be a 1950 enumerator, and how were they trained and paid? I'm always interested in this topic and have accumulated a lot of documents, including this one. Let's see what it takes to be a 1950 enumerator. You needed to be a U.S. citizen, have a high school education or equivalent, be able to understand written and spoken instructions, be able to write neatly. Well, that may be true, but you may be doing this standing up. Some people may not invite you in. Be able to talk easily with people and gain their cooperation. Have good eyesight. Be in good physical condition for climbing stairs, walking, standing, maybe running away from dogs. And in all areas have a good working fountain pen. The government's not going to give you a fountain pen. You also had to pass a written exam, and preference was given to veterans. And one of the things that I put online on JDW Talks was some training films for the enumerators when they were going through the process. The first one was called The Big Count. The National Archive has now also put this online. Training film number 2 I put online about where and how many. Training film number 3 about occupation, industry, and class of worker, so that if that confuses you when you look at the actual census form, you might see what the trainees were educated on. Income, what it is, and how to report it. And then how's your interviewing technique? There were about 12 film strips, and I've put 5 of them online. So how much money did they get? They got 7 cents a piece price rate. That was more than the 4 cents in 1940. Or they got an hourly rate if they were in rural areas. And so here, as part of some of the material I acquired, was apparently a person's worksheet, figuring out how much she was going to make. She got money for people on the population schedule, on the sample lines, which we'll talk about. People who were non-residents, lived elsewhere, there was a special form. Infant cards that were not scanned, but were asked to be filled in. And then the housing schedule as well. So this person made about $87 plus for 98 hours of work, which actually was pretty good. Question 7. Besides my YouTube videos, what other online resources are there to answer 1950 census questions? Well, on the One Step website, we do have an FAQ, a frequently asked questions section, showing you where to go to see that in terms of looking at the background, how to find numbers, viewing microfilms, etc. So there's a lot of information there. We also put an interesting flow chart. So instead of you asking us questions, we ask you questions. And depending upon what choice you pick, we then give you more information. That is our tutorial quiz. Claire has her own website called the 12 Key. It lists her blogs on the 1950 census. That's very valuable. She goes into great detail about many of the documents. And then finally, Auntie Jen's website, and I'm showing you the address of that, tries to give you as many links as possible to 1950 resource information. Question 8. What was the role of computers in the 1950 census enumeration? And in fact, not that great. What happened was when the census was done, a clerk employee, as shown here, created punch cards containing data from the 1950 census. and they were tabulated using electronic tabulators, and reminiscent of what Herman Hollerith did way back to the 1890 census. In fact, that's the origin of the IBM company that he founded. So these punch cards, when the UNIVAC 1 came along in 1951, were translated to computer code on magnetic computer tape. However, most of the analysis had already been done. And so you had all these punch cards. Look at all these punch cards. This is really the bottleneck for the UNIVAC system as it was in 1951. And here is a look at the UNIVAC, Universal Automatic Computer. It was the first successful civilian computer and was a key part of the dawn of the computer age. It weighed 16,000 pounds, used 5,000 vacuum tubes, and could perform about 1,000 calculators per minute calculations. The iPhone 6 can do 3.36 billion instructions per second. So what the computer did for 1950 wasn't that much really, but for 1960 census, it really determined how it was done. So the permanent record of the 1960 census is on something called a FOSDEC schedule. I'll show you that in a second. Sample answers and the population and housing answers when transferred to separate FOSDEC books. And FOSDEC is Film Optical Sensing Device for Input to Computers. So there's no punch cards involved here. Instead, they filmed the FOSDEC sheets, and that was put directly on magnetic tape. And for 1960, what you're going to see are these forms that were filmed by FOSDEC to have the UNIVAC computer analyze them. These are the non-sample forms. And here is the housing part sampling, population part sampling forms. And I already have a 1960 YouTube video out on that census. So let's look at the questions you might have after you actually see your population schedules. Question: I can't read the schedules column questions. Maybe the scanning of the film of the actual schedules isn't very good. The 1950 census was all destroyed after it was filmed. And the advice to you would be to get a blank high-resolution copy of the population schedule, and you can get it through the address I'm showing you. I think that goes to the Census Bureau website. So get that now and put it on a folder on the 1950 resources you might have. Question 10. I don't understand what was expected for the answers. So you see the answer, and what does that mean? Well, what you can do is you can actually get the enumerator's reference manual, and I recommend highly that you do so. The full original manual can be gotten at that address there, and it will go through each of the questions on the schedule and a little bit about what the response might be. Question 11. Explain sampling on the population schedule. Possible errors with this format. If we look at the 1950 population schedule here, we will see 6 heavy lines, 6 out of 30 at the top. And those people would be asked additional questions on the bottom. They were sampled. So there's a 20% sample. One of those 6 were asked additional questions. So there was a sample of a sample. Now you will see 5 versions of where these sample lines are within the ED sheets. So this was different than 1940, where they did have variations, but within an enumeration district, they were all the same. And I'm concerned that this is going to confuse the enumerator. There was a shift from 100% to 20% sampling from 1940 to 1950 for these items. And then this new 3 1/3% sampling included some new questions on the duration of marriage, number of years, widowed, divorced, or separated. But that's only 1 out of 33 people who were asked those questions. If we look at the start of the sampling, this is at the bottom left of the population schedule, you'll see they do not ask the enumerator to repeat the last name of the person. The only thing you see are the sample lines. And I think that might also be a source of confusion for the enumerator. A little concerned about that. Okay. Question 12. Now this may occur very rarely, but the birthplace of my person is incorrect on the schedule. Why? So let's look at the instructions to the enumerator here, and we find out it says that for a person who was born in a hospital or elsewhere outside of the state in which his family was living at the time he was born, enter the state in which his family was living, not the state in which the hospital was located. So you might have somebody who was born on vacation in some state, but that's not what his birthplace will show. Or someone who went across a river into a new state and had their child born there. So just be aware that there may be a conflict here between what the reality is and what was put down on the census schedule. Question 13. The ED sheets I have are missing a number of pages before sheet 71. Why? Well, they're not actually missing. If we look at the numbering of the sheets, what the census taker does is put the number 1 on the first sheet, and there's no A or B side. The opposite side is the housing schedule, so the next sheet is number 2. But they're told that for follow-ups and missed people that they eventually get, to put them starting on sheet number 71. So we could have 3 sheets here, 1, 2, and 71. There is nothing missing here. There is a special enumeration that was done for transients, either those in hotels who had permanent addresses elsewhere, or people who were really homeless who were in flop houses and missions. And in 1940, those were put on a separate numbered sheet. We're not sure if that's going to occur here on the 1950 census. Question 14. What's on the notes section of the population schedule? This is new. So if I take a look at the population schedule, blow it up, I see that there's a place for notes. And the enumerators were told to enter there the footnotes needed to explain unusual entries. Remarks explaining any irregular situation should be entered there. Well, what sorts of things would be entered there? Well, estimate of age. This is from the handbook. If a respondent gives an offhand estimate, such as I'm around 60, try to find out whether the person is near a 58 or 59, or possibly 61 or 62. Try to get it as accurate as possible. If age is not known, enter an estimate as the last resort and footnote it as an estimate. Okay, so that's one possibility. Here's another one. You feel you're being lied to. So you have a right as an enumerator not only to an answer, but to a truthful answer. Do not accept any statement that you believe to be false. Probe tactfully for the correct answer. If you fail to obtain a corrected answer, enter the answer given and footnote it to indicate that you believe the answer is incorrect, and also what you believe is the correct answer as nearly as you can ascertain it. Not quite sure what they would do in that situation. Or this one, there were a number of income questions, and people objected to it, and the enumerators were given a whole bunch of reasons why people should answer it. If they were really obstinate, the respondent, what you did was you gave them a confidential income report form. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But before you gave it to them, you filled it in terms of where they were on your census sheet. And so you also put on that note section that an income form was left. And this form, after they filled it in, presumably they did, was mailed back to the Census Bureau and ended up on that census sheet. So if they decided not to do that and they ignored people saying, why don't we have this form, you'll get an indication of that looking at the notes section. And finally, 15, the last question of this group, why can't I find the veteran on the census sheet but see all the other members of his or her family at their residence? Now, I'm guessing this is going to happen. So you should know something about college students. On the 1950 census, and this is from the handbook, a student who is away from home attending a school at college level, not lower, college level, is considered a resident of the ED in which he lives while attending college and not of the ED in which his home is located. Enumerate him on the population schedule at the place where he lives while attending college, even if he is home on vacation at the time of enumeration. Well, that's interesting. 1940, that's not the case. And I found this gem that the GI Bill after World War II gave the servicemen and servicewomen many options and benefits. Those who wish to continue their education in college or vocation school could do so tuition-free up to $500. You know, that's probably $4,500 today, while also receiving a cost of living stipend. As a result, almost 49% of college admissions in 1947 were veterans. The GI Bill opened the door of higher education to the working class in a way never done before. In addition to that, the GI Bill got them into housing. So there's lots of mobility going on here. You may have trouble finding where these people actually are in April of 1950 in order to find them on the census sheets by location. So we've gone through 15 questions. If enough questions are raised about the 1950 census that I haven't answered in this and the previous video, which answered 20 questions, I'll produce a third video to answer them. This has been another of my JDW Talks. I have YouTube talks on census resources, over 15 on the 1950 census alone, Ellis Island immigration, natural history topics. I'm a retired field biologist and university professor, and virtual birding field trips. So you have a large number of resources that I have contributed to. You can subscribe. I'm not giving out these videos on a regular basis. It's always nice to see how many people subscribed on my channel. So good luck on the 1950 census when it comes online. That'll be on April 1st of 2022. It'll be the first time I will be on that census.